I knew the moment my father's voice cut through the champagne-soaked air I should have walked away. But I didn't. I stood there frozen beneath the glow of chandeliers worth more than my old apartment, gripping the stem of a glass I hadn't even tasted. "You're still broke," he said loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear. Laughter crackled around him like static. The kind of laughter that comes easy when the target is someone they've already decided is small. My cheeks warmed, but inside, I felt nothing. Not shame, not anger. Just a peculiar stillness, like watching a storm from behind bulletproof glass. The string quartet kept playing its delicate winter medley, while guests in velvet gowns and tailored tuxedos leaned closer to witness the spectacle of my humiliation. And right then, right as my father smirked, satisfied, I felt my phone buzz in my hand. I glanced down. A message banner lit across the screen. "Ms. Ava Carter, your accounts now total $20 billion. I didn't gasp. Didn't blink. Didn't move at all. But my sister Lila, who'd been smirking beside Dad, saw the screen over my shoulder. The crystal flute slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble, the sound sharp as a gunshot. The room went dead silent. I locked the screen, slipped the phone into my clutch, and smiled politely as every eye in the ballroom tried to refocus, to understand, to make sense of something that did not fit their definition of me. They didn't know I had spent the last 5 years building a world none of them had access to. They didn't know I wasn't the one cornered anymore. And they didn't know the storm wasn't happening to me anymore. I was the one bringing it. The music continued, but the warmth had drained from the room. I lifted my chin, greeting a few guests who quickly looked away the moment I acknowledged them. People who once patted my shoulder with patronizing sympathy suddenly seemed unsure whether to meet my eyes. They didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath them had already begun to shift. At the far end of the ballroom, my mother waved at me with the same delicate hand she used to brush lint off embroidered tablecloths. She was smiling sweetly, but her eyes scanned me like she was assessing a threat. A familiar calculation. I'd spent years mistaking it for love. My father, meanwhile, had returned to entertaining his circle of donors, retelling his favorite stories of quarterly triumphs and market instincts that miraculously aligned with whatever consultant he'd hired that year. He didn't look my way again. Why would he? In his mind, the daughter he exiled from the family narrative had no reason to disrupt the evening. If only he knew. I drifted toward the edge of the ballroom, moving through clusters of guests who whispered into their champagne flutes as I passed. I could practically hear their theories forming inheritance, marriage mistake delusion. No one here could imagine a daughter of their world falling and climbing back up without using the name that once chained her. No one here could fathom success built outside legacy. I reached the balcony doors and slipped outside into the cold. The air tasted of pine and frost, sharp enough to cut the false warmth I'd left behind. The estate grounds stretched beneath me, wrapped in soft white snow that glistened under the floodlights. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the cold, but from the sudden wave of clarity. 5 years ago, this very house had spit me out like an inconvenience, a scapegoat. A cautionary tale of failure whispered at luncheons. They thought I would disappear quietly. They thought I would stay small. Instead, I learned how power works when no one is watching. I leaned against the railing and breathed slowly, letting the cold anchor me. Behind me through the glass doors, I could see the reflection of the ballroom crystal gold champagne people who believed money was the same thing as worth. People who had always measured me by the wrong scale. Somewhere inside that crowd was Senator Rhodes, already circling my family like a hawk, sensing weakness. Somewhere near him was CFO Lorne, the man who helped frame me years ago. And floating above it all was Lila, the golden daughter, still clutching her pearls as if wealth could mask guilt. For a moment, I wondered what my father would say if he knew the truth. If he knew the broke daughter he mocked over dinner held more financial power than every single guest in the ballroom combined. If he knew the company he worshipped was dangling above a cliff, and I was the one holding the final rope. The thought should have felt triumphant. It didn't. It felt inevitable. I brushed a stray snowflake off my sleeve. "You did this to yourself," I whispered to the cold air. "All of you did." Then I straightened, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked back into the ballroom with a calm that did not belong to the girl they once exiled. It belonged to the woman who had returned not for revenge alone, but for truth. They didn't see me coming 5 years ago. They won't survive what's coming next. My sister Lila caught up to me before I could disappear back into the crowd. She grabbed my wrist with the same grip she used when we were children sneaking out of piano lessons, except now her nails dug in as if she were pinning down prey. "Ava," she hissed through a smile so polished it could have been lacquered. "What was that little scene back there?" I gently freed my wrist. A dropped glass. Hardly a scene. Her smile tightened. Even under chandelier light, I could see her chest rising too fast, her eyes flicking with calculation. Dad was trying to lighten the mood. "You take things too seriously." She leaned closer. "And what was on your phone?" "I saw a number." I didn't answer. Her curiosity wasn't innocent. It never had been. Before she could push further, our mother glided toward us. Elise Carter in all her winter silk glory sequins, shimmering like frost under moonlight. "Girls," she said warmly, but her hand settled on my shoulder with a pressure that said, "Behave. Ava, darling, don't flee the party. You just arrived." She lowered her voice. "Your father doesn't appreciate theatrics." My breath caught for half a second. Theatrics. That was the word she used the night she told me to stand in front of cameras and apologize for something I hadn't done. Back then, I obeyed. Tonight, I simply smiled. "I was just getting some fresh air," I said. Mother's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "We need to talk. Not here. After dessert." She squeezed my arm, a coded warning wrapped in affection, then turned to greet a senator's wife with flawless poise. Lila watched her leave, then turned back to me with a grin that barely masked panic. "You should really stop getting that look on your face," she whispered. "It's making people talk." I raised an eyebrow. "And what look is that?" "The look that says you know something we don't." For once, I didn't bother hiding it. I moved past her into the ballroom again. The orchestra had shifted into a slow waltz, and couples glided across the marble floor. Servers floated between tables with trays of duck confit and sparkling rosé. It all looked elegant from a distance, but the closer I walked, the clearer everything appeared, not beauty, not celebration, but a facade desperately trying not to crack. Conversations dipped the moment I approached. I caught fragments. "Is that her? Wasn't she removed from the foundation? I heard she mishandled millions." Tragic, really. "Some people just can't keep up." My father's voice boomed from across the room mid-story as usual. "And that's why Carter Corp will always stand above the noise," he proclaimed, chest-puffed, one hand in his pocket, like he was posing for Forbes. "We protect our own. We build legacy." Legacy. That was his religion, his excuse, his shield. The very word he threw at me like a stone when he let the board strip me of everything. I took a glass from a passing tray, though I didn't intend to drink it, and drifted toward the far end of the hall where investors mingled. Most avoided eye contact, but one, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and warm eyes, nodded respectfully. "Ms. Carter," he said, lowering his voice. "Good to see you back." I studied him. I didn't recognize his face, but there was sincerity there, not pity. "Do we know each other?" "We've never met formally, but I followed your early work with the foundation. Pity how things ended." My heart squeezed not in pain, but in something like recognition. Someone had seen me even when my family didn't. Before I could reply, a familiar voice broke through the moment. CFO Lorne. The man whose signature had appeared on documents that nearly destroyed my life. The man who stood silent while I was blamed for numbers he manipulated. He approached with oily cheerfulness. "Ava. You look... well enough," I replied flatly. He laughed too loudly. Your father mentioned you might be visiting more often. Good. Your sister's been picking up the slack, of course, but perhaps we can ease the load a bit now that you're around. I stared at him. Funny. I didn't realize you thought I had any value left. His smile faltered. No need for bitterness. We've all moved on. Not all of us, I thought. Some of us clawed our way out. His eyes flicked nervously to my clutch like he suspected the phone inside it held something dangerous. He wasn't wrong. Lila reappeared, then beaming for attention as a pair of photographers walked by. Ava, come stand with us for a picture. No, I said simply. She blinked, startled. Lila wasn't used to hearing no. She was the sun in our family, and we were all expected to orbit around her. But I wasn't gravity-bound anymore. Lorne excused himself too quickly, and Lila glared after him before turning back to me. You're making everyone uncomfortable, she murmured. I took a step closer, my voice low. Maybe that's because people get uncomfortable when tides change. Her throat tightened. She hated when she couldn't read me. Hated it more when she felt something slipping out of her control. Before she could retaliate, a server approached to announce dessert was being served. Lila's eyes flicked toward the dining room. Mom wants you at the main table, she said. Don't make it awkward. I followed her inside, though every step felt like walking into a snake pit. The long mahogany table glowed under candlelight. My parents sat at the head, Lila to my mother's right, the coveted spot. I was directed toward the other end, far enough to be present, close enough to be dismissed. As I took my seat, my phone buzzed again. A message from Jonathan Hale, my private banker. Call me the moment you can. Urgent. And Ava, congratulations. My heart thudded once hard. Lila watched me from across the table, suspicion blooming behind her lashes. My father raised his glass for another toast, oblivious to the fact that the world beneath his feet had already shifted. I sat back in my chair, letting the murmurs roll past me like distant waves. Let them celebrate their illusions. Soon they would learn how fragile their throne really was. Jonathan picked up on the first ring, his voice steady, but edged with urgency. Ava, tell me you saw the second notification. I stepped out into the hallway away from the hum of the dining room. I saw it, I whispered. But I can't talk long. They're all watching me. You need to get somewhere private, he said. Your portfolio is entering a visibility threshold. Someone is trying to identify the owner behind Northbridge's most recent acquisitions. My stomach tightened. Do you know who we traced the inquiry to Chicago? He said carefully. And not the financial sector. The inquiry came from Carter Corp's internal network. The words were soft, but they hit like a blow. My family was digging into the wrong place at the worst possible time. I pressed my back against the wall, breath sharp. They're trying to find out where I've been investing. They won't be able to break through the encryption, he assured me. But Ava, it means they suspect something. You need to be prepared. Prepared. I'd been preparing for 5 years, but hearing him say it, hearing that my family was actively probing my financial life, sent a coldness through me deeper than the winter air outside. I have to go, I murmured. Send me everything you find. I already did, Jonathan said. And Ava, whatever's happening tonight, remember who you are now. I hung up before he could say more. My pulse steadied as the hallway swallowed the silence. I brushed my dress smooth, inhaled, and walked back into the lion's den. Inside the dining room, the first course had been cleared. Soft carols played beneath the chatter, but the carefully orchestrated warmth of the room felt suffocating now. My mother's eyes found me instantly. She always knew when something slipped beyond her control. Everything all right? She asked with a polite smile that didn't touch her eyes. Fine, I said. Just a business call. My father's fork clinked against his plate. Business you. He chuckled. Let me guess, someone offering you another side project. You've always had such creative career choices. The table rippled with polite laughter except for Mrs. Donnelly, our longtime housekeeper, who stood near the kitchen doorway. She gave me a subtle nod as if she saw the war happening behind my calm expression. I lifted my glass, letting the stem rest between my fingers like an anchor. Creativity has served me well. Lila scoffed softly. Oh, please. You hop from one hobby to another. Meanwhile, the rest of us actually build things. I met her gaze without blinking. Is that what you call what you're doing? She stiffened, cheeks flushing. My father cleared his throat, eager to regain attention. Speaking of building, Carter Corp has been evolving. He glanced around proudly. In fact, we're considering expanding into 3 new markets next year. Very promising. I nearly laughed. I had seen the reports that leaked internally. Carter Corp wasn't expanding, Carter Corp was sinking. But my father would rather speak of imaginary triumphs than admit weakness before an audience. Still chasing the golden years? I asked softly. He stiffened. Excuse me, you're talking like a CEO in his prime, I said. Still gentle, still smiling. But you retired 3 years ago. Ryan is supposed to be leading now. The room stopped breathing. Ryan, who had been unusually quiet all evening, straightened in his seat. We're working as a team, he muttered. Oh, then why aren't you presenting those market expansions? I asked. Why is Dad still speaking for you? My mother placed her napkin down a little too quickly. Ava, really? No, let the girl speak. My father snapped, eyes narrowing. It seems she has opinions tonight. I looked between the 2 men, one grasping at fading power, the other overshadowed by a future he wasn't equipped to hold. They were both pretending, and pretending had become the Carter family's favorite tradition. I leaned back slightly. I'm simply wondering why you're trying so hard to project strength. A pulse flickered in my father's jaw. Lila glared at me. Because we are strong. Unlike you, we didn't crumble under pressure. I gave her a level stare. Is that the story you keep telling yourself? Her face turned white. The orchestra's soft music floated over the tension, trying and failing to patch over the crack forming down the center of the Carter table. My mother, visibly rattled, changed the subject with practiced grace. We have wonderful guests tonight. Ava, you should mingle more. There are investors here who've expressed interest in supporting Lila's new initiatives. Oh, I said lightly. Which initiatives? Lila's smile wavered. You wouldn't understand. It's strategic. Strategic. The same word Rhodes used earlier. The same word used in boardrooms when people decided who gets sacrificed to protect the system. My sister had no idea how much of the game she was already a part of. As the main course arrived, my phone buzzed again. Quiet, discreet. I glanced down. A new message from Jonathan. Be careful. Someone is requesting all historical financial records tied to your family's foundation. This is not a coincidence. I swallowed, hard heat and cold mixing in my chest. They weren't just digging into my new world. They were trying to reopen the one that had destroyed me. I slipped the phone away, lifting my gaze to the family who once believed their power was absolute. They didn't know it yet, but every lie they built was beginning to tremble. And for the first time in years, I wasn't the one standing on fractured ground. I didn't realize how cold the winter air had become until I stepped out onto the balcony, closing the glass door behind me. The noise from the dining room dimmed instantly, leaving only the distant hum of classical music and the muted crackle of fire from inside. Snow drifted lazily across the sky, settling onto the railing in a soft white line. I gripped the metal edge and inhaled deeply, letting the cool air steady me. My father's mockery, Lila's snide comments, the investor's appraisal, it all swirled inside my chest like a storm refusing to settle. I wasn't the fragile version of myself they believed I still was, but being here surrounded by their voices threatened to pull me backward into the girl I used to be. Behind me, the balcony door slid open. I thought I might find you here, Mrs. Donnelly said quietly. I turned to see her carrying a small tray with 2 cups of steaming tea. She set it on the outdoor table and gave me a smile filled with more sincerity than anything I'd received that night. "Peppermint," she said. "You always liked it when things got overwhelming." I blinked, surprised. "You still remember that I remember everything they choose to forget," she said gently. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, her eyes soft as she watched the snow fall. "You don't deserve the way they speak to you," she finally said. "You never did." I swallowed, my throat tightening. "It doesn't matter anymore." Her brows raised slightly. "Child things like that always matter, even when you pretend they don't." I stared out at the snow again, letting her words settle. "They think they know everything about me. They think I've just wandered through these last 5 years accomplishing nothing." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But I've seen the way you carry yourself tonight. You're not the same girl who left this house." A small laugh escaped me. "No, I guess I'm not." "And they feel it," she said. "They don't understand it yet, but they feel it. That's why they're pushing so hard." The balcony door slid open again. There stood Mr. Avery, the foundation's longtime accountant, his silver beard dusted with snowflakes, breath visible in the cold air. He shut the door behind him quickly, eyes darting back toward the dining room as if making sure he wasn't followed. "Ms. Ava," he said, voice low. "I'm sorry to intrude, but we need to talk." My pulse quickened. "About what?" He hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Donnelly. She nodded once. "Go on," she said. "She deserves to know." Avery stepped closer, lowering his voice even more. "It's about the Carter Family Foundation. I've discovered something disturbing in the internal filings." My stomach dropped. "Filings? What kind of filings?" "Financial statements appear to have been altered," he whispered. "For years. And recently someone tried to access records connected to you, records from before you left." I tensed, a coldness spreading through me unrelated to the winter air. "Who accessed them?" His jaw tightened. "Your father. And before that, your sister." My breath caught. "Lila. She's been using her new advisory role to gain access to documents she has no clearance for," Avery said. "Including the endowment logs connected to your early projects. Projects she seems suddenly very interested in." Mrs. Donnelly inhaled sharply. "Oh dear." I stared at Avery, pulse hammering. "Why now?" "Because," he said quietly, "the foundation is nearly insolvent. Large sums were redirected without board approval. If the truth comes out, someone will take the fall." His eyes locked onto mine. "And they are preparing for it not to be the Carters who take the blame." A chill crawled up my spine. They weren't just looking into my finances. They were preparing to use me. I stepped back, gripping the edge of the balcony. "They think I'm still naive. They think I won't see the trap." Avery's voice softened. "Ms. Ava, they underestimate you. But I thought you should know before they make their next move." I nodded slowly, gratitude and fury twisting together inside me. "Thank you. Truly." He gave a small bow and slipped back inside. Mrs. Donnelly stepped beside me, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "What will you do?" I stared at the glowing mansion beyond the balcony, where laughter floated faintly through the glass. "I'll do what they never expected," I whispered. "I'll let them keep playing their game." And then I turned toward her, resolve settling like steel. "And then I'll show them who they mistook for a pawn." She smiled, proud and sad all at once. "You always were the sharpest one in the room." Snow fell gently between us, soft and silent, as the storm gathering inside me finally crystallized into something clear. I wasn't here for validation. I was here for truth. And soon, The truth would be impossible for any of them to ignore. When I stepped back into the hallway, the air felt warmer than it should have, heavy humming with the kind of tension that settles only when secrets begin to crack. I walked slowly toward the main staircase, trying to steady the rhythm of my breath. But the shadows in this house had always known how to follow me, and tonight they seemed eager. I made it halfway down the stairs when I heard raised voices drifting from the west corridor. My mother's sharp whisper cut through the air, first followed by my father's low, thunderous growl. "You were supposed to keep her occupied," Mom hissed. "How did she end up alone in the study?" "I didn't think she'd go in," Dad snapped. "She was always predictable, quiet, contained." "That was before she left," Mom said. "She's different." I paused, one hand tightening around the polished banister. Their silhouettes stretched across the marble floor as they argued in front of the cracked open door to Dad's office. Curiosity tugged at me stronger than the instinct to retreat. Dad rubbed his temples. "You're overthinking this. Ava can't do anything. She doesn't have access." Mom crossed her arms. "Richard, she doesn't need access. She just needs to start asking questions. If she finds out about the foundation accounts..." "She won't," he said firmly. "Not if Lila keeps her mouth shut." My pulse thudded once heavy and loud. My sister. Of course. Mom lowered her voice, but I still heard it. "Lila's not stable right now. She's terrified you'll choose Ava over her if things fall apart. She's been drinking too much. She's paranoid." Dad exhaled sharply. "Then keep her calm. We just need to get through tonight without a scene." A brittle laugh escaped Mom. "Richard, she shattered a champagne tower at Thanksgiving because she thought someone called her irrelevant. She doesn't do calm." The sound of footsteps echoed behind me, and I slipped quickly into the side hallway before anyone spotted me. My heart pounded as I leaned against the wall trying to gather my thoughts. They weren't worried about my presence. They were afraid of what I might already know. And the more they hid, the clearer things became. I wasn't imagining the nervous glances, the subtle tension in Lila's smile, the hushed conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. This family, my family, had built an empire on immaculate facades. But cracks had been forming for years, and tonight I was finally seeing the fractures from the inside. I turned the corner too quickly and collided with someone. A glass clinked. Liquid splashed onto the carpet. "Oh my God! Watch where you're going!" Lila shrieked. Her wine glass wobbled in her hand, red dripping from the rim like blood. She steadied herself, then fixed me with an expression somewhere between panic and accusation. "Why are you sneaking around?" she demanded. "What did you hear?" I straightened myself, smoothing the front of my dress. "Hallways aren't private property, Lila. Anyone can walk through them." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't play dumb. You've been acting strange all night." I tilted my head. "Strange how..." She took a shaky sip of wine. "You're too calm. Too quiet. That's not you. You used to wear your emotions like a neon sign. Now you're... unreadable." "Maybe that's growth," I said softly. Her grip tightened around the stem of her glass. "Or maybe you're hiding something." For a moment, neither of us moved. The tension stretched thin as glass. A passing waiter paused reading the room, then wisely retreated. I took a breath. "Are you hiding something, Lila?" She flinched just slightly, but enough. Her gaze darted toward Dad's office, then back to me. "What would I possibly be hiding?" she said, but her voice wavered. "Foundation accounts," I whispered. She froze lips, parting eyes, widening like I'd reached out and slapped her. You don't know anything?" she stammered. "Dad said..." She cut herself off, horror flashing across her face. "Dad said what I pressed." Her breath came fast now, shallow. She looked around as if the walls themselves might snitch on her. "You're trying to trap me," she said, stepping back. "I knew it. I knew you came here to ruin everything." I frowned. "I came here because I was invited. Her laugh cracked. No, you came to humiliate us, just like you always do. You think you're better than me now. I never said that. You don't have to, she whispered, venom mixing with fear. I see it in the way you look at me, like I'm one of your charity cases, like I'm weak. Her voice shook on the last word. And suddenly, I saw it, not the polished, perfect version of Lila she showed the world, but the fragile girl beneath crumbling under pressure she couldn't handle. Lila, I said gently, whatever you've gotten into, whatever you're afraid of, don't you dare pity me, she snarled. Then she pushed past me so hard my shoulder slammed into the wall, her heels clicked away on the marble. But halfway down the hall, she stopped and turned back, her expression twisted by something close to despair. Be careful, Ava, she whispered. Not everyone in this house wants you to walk out of here unscathed. Then she vanished around the corner. I stood there long after she disappeared, the echo of her warning settling into my bones. This was no longer just family dysfunction. This was a battlefield. And I had only just begun to understand the rules. The ballroom glowed with soft amber light when I stepped back inside the string quartet playing a muted winter melody that barely reached above the low hum of conversation. Crystal glasses clinked. Laughter rippled through the air. Every guest looked perfectly at ease, completely unaware that the Carter family was a single spark away from burning itself to the ground. I forced myself to move through the room with steady steps, even though Lila's warning still echoed like a pulse behind my ribs. Not everyone wants you to walk out unscathed. She hadn't said it out of spite. She'd said it out of fear, and fear in this family was rarely misplaced. My father's financial advisor, Preston Hale, intercepted me near the dessert table carrying a glass of bourbon that sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Ms. Ava, he purred, smiling too wide. I've been meaning to speak with you. I matched his smile politely. Preston. Enjoying the party. Always, he said, leaning in. Especially when I notice promising opportunities. I stepped back slightly. Preston had always been the kind of man who treated every conversation like a transaction. Tonight, something about him felt particularly predatory. He glanced around before lowering his voice. I heard you were asking questions earlier. About the foundation. My breath caught. Who told you that? He chuckled. Your sister talks too loudly when she's nervous, and she's very nervous tonight. I kept my face still. Neutral. I wasn't asking questions, just catching up with people. He swirled his drink lazily. Of course, but if you were curious, I'd be happy to help guide you. His smile sharpened. For the right price. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I don't need guidance. He raised one eyebrow. Are you sure? Because whatever you think you know, trust me, it's bigger than that. Before I could respond, he walked away, slipping easily into a circle of investors as if he hadn't just dangled bait in front of me. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Preston wasn't stupid. If he'd noticed my interest in the foundation, others had too, which meant the people orchestrating this financial mess were starting to panic. And panic made people dangerous. I turned to leave the ballroom, but another voice called my name. This time it was warm, familiar. Ava. I turned to see Mrs. Donnelly approaching with a small envelope in her hand, her expression tight with urgency. I didn't want to give this to you in front of the family, she whispered. But you need to see it. My pulse quickened as I opened the envelope. Inside was a printed copy of an internal transaction log, 5 unauthorized withdrawals, over $14 million, all routed through a shadow account linked to... My fingers froze. Lila, I whispered. Mrs. Donnelly nodded gravely, or someone using her credentials, but they wanted it to look like her. A wave of shock rippled through me, followed immediately by a surge of anger. My sister wasn't perfect, but she wasn't stupid enough to embezzle millions. Someone was setting her up. And there's more. Mrs. Donnelly murmured. "Look at the dates." I scanned the log again. 4 of the transactions occurred after I left the foundation. But one massive withdrawal was authenticated 12 days before I'd resigned 5 years ago, using my old access code. The room seemed to tilt for a moment. "No," I breathed. "That's impossible. My code was disabled the day I left." "Someone revived it," she said. "Temporarily. Just long enough." My chest tightened. Someone wanted it to look like the fraud began with me. "This is why they asked about my old projects," I whispered. "Why they pushed for an audit last month. They're building a narrative. A false one," she said firmly. "But if you don't get ahead of it—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. My father could spin any story he wanted. He could turn numbers into weapons. He could make Lila the scapegoat, or me, or both of us, if it meant shielding his legacy. "Where did you get this?" I asked. Her eyes flickered toward the second-floor mezzanine. "Someone who can't risk being seen with you." Before I could ask more, she slipped away into the crowd. I tucked the envelope into my clutch and moved quickly toward the staircase. I needed airspace silence to think. But as I reached the landing, I felt someone step beside me. It was Eric Blake, one of the foundation board members. Tall, meticulous, flawless suit, perfect mask. "Ms. Carter," he said, his tone smooth as polished stone. "A word." "I'm in a hurry," I replied. "Then I'll make it short." He leaned close. Too close. "Stop digging." I stiffened. "Excuse me?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're stirring up unrest. Old files, old access logs, old suspicions." "Maybe because something's wrong," I said. He whispered, "Then let the people in charge handle it." "You mean the people who caused it?" His expression hardened, and for a split second, I saw the truth. He wasn't warning me. He was threatening me. "Walk away, Ava," he murmured, "before this becomes complicated." Then he vanished down the staircase, leaving a trail of menace in his wake. My fingers shook as I gripped the railing. This wasn't just corruption, it was orchestration, and now they knew I was onto them. A sudden sound from behind made me turn sharply. Someone was watching me from the far end of the hall. Lila, eyes wide, hands trembling. The moment our eyes met, she mouthed one word, "Run." But before I could react, the lights flickered. Guests gasped downstairs, and the mansion went completely dark. Darkness swallowed the mansion so suddenly that the air seemed to collapse inward. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a chorus of startled gasps rose from the ballroom below, followed by the clatter of glass and a few muffled cries. I gripped the railing to ground myself, my eyes straining against pitch black. The chandeliers had gone silent, their warm glow extinguished as if someone had snatched the light straight from the ceiling. "Ava," a voice whispered urgently. "Lila." I turned toward the faint sound of her footsteps, but I couldn't see her, only the vague shape of her silhouette. "What happened?" I whispered back. "Backup generator failed," she said, breath uneven. "Or was shut off." My blood ran cold. Nothing in this house failed. Things here were controlled, curated, intentional. If the lights were out, someone wanted them out. A crash echoed from the ballroom, a tray dropping, guests stumbling in panic. Lila's fingers closed around my wrist in the dark. "We need to get out of the hallways. Now." "What about the guests?" I asked. "They're safer in a crowd," she said, tugging me toward the side corridor. "You're not." Her grip shook against my skin. She wasn't just scared for herself. She was scared for me. We moved in near blindness, feeling along the paneled walls as faint emergency lights flickered far below in the foyer. The mansion wasn't built for darkness. Its beauty depended on illumination, on spectacle. Without light, the place felt cavernous and predatory. Halfway down the corridor, a door creaked open behind us. We both froze. "Ava Carter," a man's voice called. Not Dad, not Preston, not Eric. The voice was unfamiliar and too calm. Lila tightened her grip. "Don't answer." My heartbeat pounded so hard I felt it in my throat. Footsteps approached slowly, heel against marble, deliberate, as if the darkness had turned the corridor into a stage he knew well. Lila tugged me into a small side alcove, the two of us pressing into the narrow space just as a beam of a flashlight cut across the hallway. The man held it low, sweeping it back and forth. His other hand rested in his coat pocket in a way that made dread coil in my stomach. He wasn't a guest, wasn't staff. His shoes were wrong, his posture was wrong, his purpose here was wrong. "Ava," he said, voice low and coaxing. "We need a word." My breath lodged in my chest. He knew my name, and he knew I was no longer in the ballroom. Lila squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. Her whisper trembled. "He's not supposed to be here. I saw him talking to Eric earlier. I think he's the one they hired. Hired for what I whispered. To make this go away." The words sliced through me. Make what go away, me. The evidence. The scandal waiting to explode. The flashlight paused, pointed toward our hiding spot, then slowly moved on. I exhaled shakily, only realizing then that I'd been holding my breath. The man walked deeper into the corridor, each step measured, confident. Hunting. The moment he disappeared around the corner, Lila tugged me out of the alcove. "We don't have much time," she whispered, dragging me toward the stairwell. "If Eric brought him, then Dad knows nothing. This isn't family business anymore. This is something else." We descended the staircase quickly, guided only by the faint glow of emergency lights flickering like dying fireflies. The sounds from the ballroom grew louder, a swell of confusion, the rustling of people fidgeting with their phones, dead screens glowing uselessly. Someone shouted for candles. Someone else demanded staff. Chaos had softened the edges of the Carter performance. I almost smiled, almost. We reached the landing, and Lila halted abruptly. Voices drifted from the ballroom. "Ava hasn't been seen. She'll turn up. She can't leave. She knows too much." My stomach twisted. That last voice belonged unmistakably to Preston Hale. Lila leaned close. "We need to get to the side door. My car is in the service lot." "But if I run—" "You survive," she said fiercely. "That's what matters." Her resolve startled me. "What about you?" I whispered. She swallowed. "I'll catch up." But something in her tone told me she doubted that. A loud crack split the air, the sound of something hard hitting the floor. Then frantic footsteps. Someone screamed. The lights flickered once, twice, then surged back on with a blinding snap. The chandeliers relit. The music stuttered back to life. And the man with the flashlight now stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, staring directly at me. His expression didn't change. He reached inside his coat. Lila shoved me hard. "Run!" I sprinted across the landing, weaving between startled guests as voices rose around me. "Ava, stop, call security." There she is. I didn't stop. Couldn't. Adrenaline burned through every vein as I shoved open the staff hallway door and plunged inside. Lila stayed behind. I heard her voice once more. Sharp, terrified. "Leave her alone." Then the door slammed shut, cutting off everything except the pounding of my footsteps and the echo of a truth I had ignored for too long. My family wasn't just corrupt, they were dangerous. And now that I was getting closer to the truth, they were ready to make sure I never uncovered it. The service hallway stretched ahead of me like a narrow tunnel lit only by a few dim bulbs that buzzed overhead. My footsteps echoed sharply against the concrete floor as I ran, each breath scraping my throat raw. Somewhere behind me, far too close, the heavy clang of a metal door slamming open signaled that the man had followed. I pushed deeper into the restricted wing, passing storage rooms, linen closets, and old maintenance equipment. The building's warmth faded, replaced by a hollow chill that seeped through the walls. Everything here felt abandoned, forgotten, a sharp contrast to the glittering world upstairs. At the end of the hall, I reached a locked service door. I jiggled the handle. No use. Behind me, footsteps quickened. I turned left, slipping into the laundry corridor. Giant industrial dryers rumbled like engines, creating a dull roar that hid my breathing. I pressed myself behind one of the metal carts piled high with folded linens and forced my mind to steady. Think. The man was hunting me, not chasing blindly. He moved like someone trained someone who'd done this before. Running was only buying time, nothing more. A faint vibration buzzed against my hip. My phone. I pulled it from my clutch and blinked at the caller ID. Unknown number. My breath caught. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me swipe to answer. Ava. A voice said, hushed and desperate. It took me a second to recognize it. Dad. Oh, thank God, he said. Where are you, deception? That was my first instinct. But his voice, it was shaking. Not angry, not commanding. Shaking. I'm somewhere in the service wing, I whispered. What's going on? There was a rustle on his end, then a muffled curse. Listen to me. You need to leave the house immediately. A cold wave spread through me. Dad, if this is about the foundation, this is about your life, he snapped. You don't understand. Eric brought someone tonight. Someone who doesn't answer to me. My stomach twisted. The man with the flashlight. Yes, Dad said. He wasn't supposed to be here. I just found out he's not licensed security. He works off record for a firm that specializes in dealing with inconvenient problems. I gripped the edge of the cart, my knuckles white. So I'm the problem? No, he said quickly. But you're the piece they can remove easiest. He wasn't denying the corruption. He wasn't pretending innocence. He was just trying to stop the bleeding. Before I could respond, he lowered his voice. I'm going to cause a distraction. When you hear commotion near the West Wing, run for the greenhouse exit. But Lila, I whispered. He exhaled shakily. I'll get to her. Just go. The line cut off. I lowered the phone, slowly, stunned by the unfamiliar sound in my father's voice. Fear. For me. For the daughter he spent years dismissing, criticizing, belittling. Heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. I ducked behind the industrial dryer just seconds before the man entered the laundry hall. The harsh beam of his flashlight scanned the carts, the machines, the corners. His shadow stretched long and distorted against the wall. He paused, tilted his head. Listening. Then his flashlight clicked off. Darkness swallowed the corridor again. He was trying to hear my breathing. I clamped a hand over my mouth, forcing myself silent. For several agonizing seconds, he didn't move. Then, from somewhere upstairs, a thunderous crash shook the air. Glass shattering, voices shouting, another crash. My father's distraction. The man turned toward the noise, muttering something under his breath before sprinting back down the hall. I didn't wait. I bolted in the opposite direction, slipping through another narrow passage until I found a rusted maintenance door leading into the back gardens. I pushed it open, wincing as cold air sliced against my skin. The gardens were pitch black except for the faint glow of lanterns sprinkled near the pathways. Snow blanketed the hedges in soft mounds, silent under my feet as I ran across the lawn. In the distance, the greenhouse loomed like a glass cathedral, its frosted windows glowing faintly from within. Almost there. I quickened my pace, breath puffing in clouds, but halfway to the greenhouse, a figure emerged from the shadows. My heart stopped. Then the figure stepped into the light. Not the man. Not security. Lila. I gasped. Her makeup was smudged, hair-tangled dress, slightly torn as if she'd been grabbed or jostled. She ran straight toward me, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, God! Ava!" she cried, collapsing into my arms. It's worse than I thought. They blamed me. They said I leaked everything they told the board. I compromised donor accounts. She was shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped my arms around her. Lila. It's okay. We're leaving. Dad's helping. No, she whispered, pulling back. You don't understand. Understand what? They're not just covering up financial fraud, she said, voice trembling. They're merging the foundation with a private investment firm, one that's been laundering money. And they used our accounts to funnel everything. My throat tightened. They used your credentials. She shook her head, sobbing harder. And yours, Ava. They revived your old access codes. They made it look like the two of us built the pipeline. The cold hit deeper than the winter air ever could. Everything made sense now. The documents, the audit, the man hunting me. They want us both gone, she whispered, one way or another. A branch snapped behind us. We spun toward the sound, but it wasn't the man. It was Mrs. Donnelly, breathless eyes wide. Girls, she said, voice urgent, you must move now. Where I asked. She pointed toward the back gate, barely visible through the snow. There's a service road beyond that fence. A car is waiting. A car, Lila echoed. Yes, she said, and not one your father arranged. The wind howled across the garden. We didn't have time to question it. I grabbed Lila's hand. Together we ran. And for the first time all night, I felt the shift, the unmistakable turning of a tide. We were no longer the hunted. We were survivors in motion, running straight toward the truth they tried so desperately to bury. Snow whipped against my face as we sprinted across the back garden, our breath forming white bursts in the freezing air. The wind howled through the hedges, bending the branches like skeletal arms reaching to drag us back toward the mansion. Lila stumbled beside me, her grip on my hand trembling but desperate. We weren't just running from danger anymore, we were running from years of lies, from a legacy that had twisted itself into something venomous. Ahead, the back gate came into view, barely illuminated by a barely working lantern. A black sedan idled just beyond the fence engine, humming quietly. I couldn't tell if that sound brought relief or another wave of dread. Who sent the car? I asked, breathless. Mrs. Donnelly was several steps behind us, her shawl flapping wildly in the wind. You'll know in a moment, she said. Just keep moving. But as we reached the gate, a figure stepped out from behind the sedan. I froze. The porch light from the greenhouse behind us caught his face just enough for recognition to hit me like ice. Alex, I whispered. He lifted his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of peace. Ava. I got your message, but I didn't message. I stopped. I hadn't messaged him, but someone did. Lila looked from him to me, confusion clouding her eyes. Who is this, my business partner? I said slowly. The co-founder of Horizon 7. Alex nodded. When I saw your missed call and the warning text, Ava in danger, I didn't hesitate. I'm sorry if I startled you. My stomach twisted. If the text didn't come from me, then someone else was orchestrating this escape, someone who knew I needed it. Mrs. Donnelly caught up to us, collapsing against the fence for balance. I couldn't use my own phone, she wheezed. I borrowed one from the gardener. Relief washed through me. She had sent the message. She had saved us. But the momentary comfort vanished when a shout echoed from the mansion. They're heading through the gardens. Past the hedges, flashlights bobbed in the darkness. Multiple flashlights. The man wasn't hunting alone anymore. Alex stepped forward immediately, urgency flaring in his eyes. Ava, get in the car. Now! Lila clutched my arm. We can't leave Mrs. Donnelly. But the housekeeper shook her head fiercely. I'm not coming. If they see me with you, they'll know I helped. Go. Go before it's too late. I shook my head. We can't just... She pressed her hand to my cheek, her touch warm despite the cold. Child, I've survived this family longer than anyone. I know how to hide. But you... Her voice broke. You need to live. Voices grew louder behind us. Footsteps pounded across snow. Alex unlocked the car doors with a sharp beep. Ava. Now, I grabbed Lila and practically shoved her into the back seat before climbing in after her. Alex ran around to the driver's side and slammed his door shut just as the first flashlight beam pierced through the hedge behind us. "Drive," I shouted. He didn't hesitate. The sedan lurched forward, tires spraying snow as we sped down the narrow service road. The mansion grew smaller behind us, its golden windows flickering like false promises swallowed by the darkness. Inside the car, Lila curled into herself, shaking uncontrollably. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You're safe," I whispered. "No," she breathed back. "We're not." Alex glanced at us through the rearview mirror. "Who are these people? What were you running from?" I opened my clutch and pulled out the envelope Mrs. Donnelly had given me, the transaction logs, the digital fingerprints of a conspiracy too big to comprehend. "This," I said quietly. "This is what we're running from." I handed the papers to him. He scanned the first page, and his jaw clenched. $14 million, he murmured, funneled through mirrored accounts, and 2 signatures forged using old credentials. "Mine," I said, "and my sister's." He looked at me through the mirror, face hardening. "Ava, this isn't just embezzlement. This is federal fraud, money laundering. Whoever orchestrated this knew exactly what they were doing." Lila wiped her eyes with the back of her trembling hand. "They wanted to pin everything on us." "And they nearly did," Alex said grimly. "If this had gone public, you two would have been destroyed." I took a breath, the weight of the truth settling like a stone in my chest. "We need to go to the authorities." Lila stiffened. "Ava, no. You don't understand. Reporting this means exposing everything. The foundation, Dad, our whole family." "He put a hitman in that house," I snapped. "He doesn't get to hide anymore." She flinched but didn't argue. Alex's hands tightened on the wheel. "Before we go to anyone official, we need evidence. Enough that they can't twist the narrative back onto you." "We have the logs," I said. "That's a start," he replied. "But not enough." Lila swallowed. "What else is there?" Alex hesitated. Then he said the words that pulled the air from my lungs. "Somebody else sent me a file before I arrived, a dump of internal foundation emails, signed only with an initial. M." My heart stopped. "Mom," I whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by a storm of conflicting emotions, betrayal, fear, grief, and something else entirely. Hope. Not for the family I thought I had, but for the truth that someone inside was finally ready to reveal. We drove deeper into the night, headlights carving a path through the falling snow. Behind us, the Carter estate disappeared entirely. Ahead of us, a war was waiting. But for the first time, I wasn't running. I was preparing. The motel room was a dim, flickering box of peeling wallpaper and buzzing fluorescent light, a world away from the marble perfection of the Carter estate. The heater clicked every few seconds, barely warming the stale, dusty air. But it was safe, or at least safer than where we had been. Alex locked the door behind us and pulled the thin curtains shut. Outside, snow drifted under the yellow glow of a parking lot lamppost. Inside, silence hung heavy. Lila collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. Her shoulders trembled in small, broken motions. I sat beside her, rubbing her back slowly. I didn't have words yet. I wasn't sure there were words for what she'd endured or for the guilt I felt for not having seen any of this sooner. Alex dropped his backpack on the table and opened his laptop. "We need to move quickly," he said. "Whatever happened tonight means they're not concerned about subtlety anymore. They're panicking." I glanced up. "Did you look at the email file you mentioned?" "Not fully," he said. "I wanted to wait until we were somewhere safe." He clicked open a folder titled M. My pulse quickened. Dozens of encrypted files, some zipped, some marked confidential, some labeled with dates spanning the last 8 years. "Jesus," I murmured. These look like internal communications between top Foundation executives, Alex said, scrolling. And if I'm right, someone risked everything to leak this. Lila lifted her head, mascara smeared. Was it her? Was it Mom? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he clicked open a document labeled For Secrecy Clause Vim. Lines of text filled the screen notes from a board meeting. My name appeared in the 5th paragraph. My stomach nodded. We must remove Ava from financial systems immediately. She has begun scrutinizing discretionary grants. Transfer her access credentials to archive for later use. Later use. There it was, the weapon they'd held onto for years. Lila leaned closer, her trembling fingers hovering over the trackpad. Scroll. He did. And the next line nearly stopped my heart. Lila's emotional volatility makes her ideal as a fallback narrative. If needed, shift responsibility accordingly. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They planned it. They planned all of it. Her voice cracked into a sound that barely resembled anything human. Rage and heartbreak tangled together, ripping through her chest. I grabbed her hand. Lila, look at me. This isn't your fault. They used me, she whispered. They made me feel unstable on purpose. They made me doubt myself. She broke off, sobbing. Alex turned away respectfully, letting her have a moment. I pulled her into my arms as she cried. They chose you because they knew they could control you. That doesn't make you weak. It makes them monsters. When she finally pulled back, she wiped her face with the heel of her palm. Keep going, she whispered. Alex opened the next file. More emails, more signatures, more schemes. But then he opened one marked with a red flag icon, and everything shifted. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It wasn't typed. It was scanned. A letter. One written in my mother's unmistakable cursive. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Read it, I whispered. Alex began gently, almost cautiously. If anything happens, this must go to Ava. She was right to question the Foundation. Richard has made deals I cannot condone. Eric siphoned millions under the guise of operational expenses. And Preston. His involvement is darker than any of us realized. I closed my eyes, my heart twisting. She had known. She had tried to protect me. But the letter wasn't over. If Ava discovers the truth, she must not confront them alone. They will retaliate. They will paint her as unstable. They will call her vindictive. They will use her own courage against her. My throat tightened painfully. I fear for her life. By the time Alex finished, silence pressed on all of us like a tangible weight. Lila whispered Mom knew. She knew everything. And she couldn't say a word. I swallowed hard. Why would she leak the files now? Alex clicked to the last page, a timestamp. The letter had been scanned and emailed 2 hours before the Christmas party began. Just 2 hours. My mother had sent her warning right before she welcomed guests into her home with a perfect smile, knowing the house was a nest of vipers. Lila's voice trembled. We need to go back for her. No, Alex said firmly, closing the laptop. Not yet. If she's still there, she's playing her part. If you go back, you'll blow everything. I pressed my palms to my eyes, overwhelmed. So what do we do? Alex leaned forward, voice steady. We expose them. All of them. With everything we have. Lila sniffed. To who? Authorities, donors, press. Everyone, he said. But we need one more thing first, proof tying the transactions directly to the private investment firm they were laundering through. And where do we find that? I asked. He hesitated. Then he pointed to the very last file in the folder. Here. But it's encrypted. A digital vault. Lila frowned. A vault for what? Alex met my eyes. For the evidence your mother died trying to hide. My heart stopped. Died, I whispered. He swallowed. Ava. The timestamp on that sent file. It wasn't from tonight. I stared at him, not understanding. It was from 2 years ago. The room spun. Lila's breath hitched. My vision blurred. No. No. Impossible. She's alive, I said. She was at the party. I saw her. I talked to her. Alex shook his head, face pale. Ava. Someone forged her appearance tonight. Someone pretended. Someone used a double or makeup or a staged illusion. But the real Vivian Carter never left that evidence vault 2 years ago. The words hit like a blade, and as they sank in, something inside me shattered, then hardened. If they thought they'd broken me with this, they'd miscalculated beyond belief. The room tilted for a moment, the edges blurring, as if reality itself had cracked. I gripped the side of the motel table to steady myself, but nothing could anchor the blow Alex had just delivered. My mother, Vivian Carter, the woman whose perfume still lingered in my childhood memories, whose voice had shaped every instinct I carried, whose silhouette I swore I'd seen just hours ago, had been gone for 2 years. Lila stood frozen, her face a pale mask of disbelief. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. Mom hugged me at Thanksgiving. She kissed my cheek. She told me. Lila, Alex said gently, Who told you that was her? Her breath stuttered. I don't know. I just assumed. Because in the Carter family, assumptions were easier than truth. The heater buzzed. Snow tapped softly at the window. The silence stretched, suffocating. My mind raced back through the night. Every word, every glance, every moment with the woman I had accepted without a second thought as my mother. But now, replaying it, something felt wrong. Her voice had been softer than I remembered. Her perfume absent. Her hug brief, awkward, almost rehearsed. A stranger wearing familiarity like a costume. I sank into the chair, pressing my trembling hands into my face. Why? Why would they fake her being alive? Alex opened the letter again. Because if the world knew Vivian Carter had died under suspicious circumstances, it would unravel everything your father and his partners built. The foundation, their influence, their money pipeline. Lila's voice cracked. How did she die? We don't know, Alex replied. But someone went to a lot of trouble to bury it, literally and digitally. My stomach twisted. Someone had buried her and replaced her, not to mourn, but to manipulate. The weight of that truth pressed down like a collapsing ceiling. Finally, I lifted my head. We need to break into the vault. Alex nodded. The file location is labeled VC Secure Vault. That means it's tied to a physical server, most likely at Carter Industries headquarters. So we go there, I said. In broad daylight, he asked, where half the board members want you eliminated, where security answers to the very people framing you. He wasn't wrong. But giving up wasn't an option. Lila wiped her smeared mascara with the back of her hand. What if we go at night? Use the loading dock entrance. I know the passcode. Dad never changed it. She said it with such painful innocence that my chest tightened. How many secrets had she been kept away from? How many truths had I missed? Alex began pacing. Even if we get inside, there'll be locked rooms, surveillance, biometric scanners. I have her jewelry, Lila said suddenly, looking up with wide, terrified eyes. Mom's necklace. The one she wore everywhere. It has her old thumbprint embedded in the clasp. Maybe... Alex stopped pacing, turned slowly. A legacy biometric token, he murmured. Those were phased out years ago. But if Carter Industries never updated, it could work. I finished. And for the first time since this nightmare began, hope flickered, dangerous, thin, but real. Alex grabbed his keys. If we leave now, we can make it before security shifts change. Lila stood shakily. I'm coming. I turned to her. It will be dangerous. Her eyes hardened, the fear burning into something sharper. They used my name, my codes, my life. I'm not hiding anymore. Her voice didn't tremble this time. We gathered the documents, stuffed them into Alex's backpack, and moved toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, my phone buzzed. A number flashed across the screen. Blocked. I answered anyway. A rough, breathy voice whispered, "If you go near that building, Ava, you won't walk out." I froze. Who is this? You think tonight was about scaring you? No. Tonight was a warning. Turn around. Run. Don't dig up what isn't yours. Alex stepped closer, listening. The voice continued low and deadly. You still have time to disappear. But if you keep pushing, there won't be a second warning. Then the call ended. I lowered the phone, my pulse hammering. Who was it? Lila asked. Someone who knows exactly what we're planning, I said quietly. Alex checked the window, peering out into the empty parking lot. We don't have time to be afraid, they're already ahead of us. I nodded. We slipped outside, the wind slicing across our faces. Snow blew in erratic swirls under the motel lights. Alex unlocked the car and we jumped in. But as the engine started, headlights flared in the mirror. A black SUV idling across the lot. No license plate. Just like the one from the mansion. Alex's hands tightened on the wheel. They found us. I inhaled deeply, tasting cold metal in the back of my throat. Drive, I said. He floored it. The tires screeched, kicking up slush as we sped out of the lot and onto the frozen highway. The SUV lurched forward, trailing close behind, headlights glaring like twin predators' eyes. Lila clutched the door handle so tightly her knuckles whitened. They're going to run us off the road. Not if we lose them first, Alex muttered, swerving sharply toward the on-ramp. The SUV followed. Fast. Too fast. Within seconds, it was only a few car lengths behind us. Alex leaned forward over the wheel. Hold on. He cut across 2 lanes, merging onto a service road. Snow flurried around us as the SUV skidded, regained control, then accelerated again. They're trained, he growled. This isn't intimidation. This is interception. What do they want? Lila cried. To stop us before we reach the vault, I said. Before we expose them. Before we learn how deep my mother's truth went. Before everything they built collapses. The SUV surged closer. Then its window rolled down. A man leaned out, arm extended, something metallic in his hand. Alex shouted, "Down!" A shot rang out. Glass shattered behind my head. I screamed. Lila ducked, covering her face. Alex swerved hard, the car fishtailing on the icy road. Another shot. Another spark against the rear window. He gritted his teeth. This ends now. He jerked the wheel, turning sharply onto an unlit side road flanked by thick forest. The SUV followed for a moment, then its tires lost traction on the slope. It skidded sideways, veered, and slammed nose first into a snowbank. Alex didn't slow. He pressed the accelerator until the trees swallowed the road and the SUV's headlights vanished behind us. We didn't speak for several minutes. Finally, Alex exhaled. We're going to the vault. I looked at Lila, then at the dark road ahead. My voice was steady. We finish what Mom started. The Carter Industries headquarters rose against the night sky like a glass monolith, cold and towering, its steel edges catching the faint glow of the street lamps. Snow fell in slow, deliberate flakes, settling onto the rooftop and softening the harsh angles of the building. At this hour, only a handful of lights glowed on the upper floors. The place looked deserted, but we knew better. Alex cut the headlights and guided the car into the shadowy loading dock alley behind the building. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound in the quiet night. We do this fast, he said, pulling on gloves. We get in, get the vault data, and get out. Lila nodded, still pale but determined. The passcode should still be the same. Dad used it for years. I breathed in slowly, letting the cold air sharpen my focus. Everything Mom had tried to hide, everything this family had tried to bury, waited for us inside this building. We slipped toward the service door. Lila punched in the code 03197, and for a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked open. We stepped inside. The hallways were lit only by dim emergency strips, giving the building a hollow, abandoned feel. Our footsteps echoed as we hurried down a corridor lined with framed awards and photographs of smiling Carters, each one looking more deceitful than the last. "Vault room is on the 3rd floor," Alex whispered. "But the elevator cameras don't work after midnight," Lila said. "Dad used to sneak the board in after hours during crisis meetings. So much corruption disguised as convenience." We took the elevator. The ride felt endless, each second tightening the coil of anticipation inside my chest. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent. Too silent. We moved quickly. Down one corridor, around a corner, to a reinforced steel door marked Financial Records, Restricted Access. Alex exhaled. "This is it." He pulled out the necklace, the one Lila had insisted on bringing, the one with the thumbprint clasp. "My mother's last safeguard. Ready?" he asked. I pressed my thumb to the metal scanner beside the door. Nothing happened. My pulse spiked. "Try Mom's," Lila whispered. Alex placed the necklace against the scanner. The metal warmed beneath his fingers. The scanner beeped. The locks disengaged. The door swung open with a low groan. Inside, rows of server stacks blinked softly like a constellation trapped behind glass. The temperature dropped instantly cold enough that each breath came out in a cloud. The hum of machinery filled the room like a heartbeat. Alex hurried to the main terminal and plugged in his decryption drive. "I'll get the vault open." I stood beside Lila as she scanned the glowing racks. "Do you think Mom came in here?" she murmured. "Yes," I whispered, and I think it terrified her. Before she could answer, Alex spoke. "I'm in." We crowded around the terminal. Lines of code scrolled. A directory appeared. VC Primary Vault Archive. Alex clicked. The files inside were vast. Transactions, emails, contracts, and a folder marked Vivian Final Record. I felt my knees weaken. "Open it." I breathed. Alex hesitated. "Ava, once we see this, there's no going back. There already isn't." He clicked. A video file loaded. My heart hammered. The footage flickered, then stabilized. My mother appeared on the screen. Alive. Real. Afraid. Her eyes darted toward the camera as she whispered, "If you're seeing this, then they've destroyed my physical records and likely erased every trail they can find. But they cannot erase the truth." Richard, Eric, and Preston. Her voice broke. "They're laundering money through the foundation. They made threats. I confronted them. I thought I could reason with them. I was wrong." Lila gripped my hand as tears streamed down her cheeks. Mom continued, voice hoarse. "They used Ava's old access to stage the initial breach. They planned to pin it on her if needed. And they planned to use Lila as the emotional scapegoat. My daughters, they don't deserve this." She inhaled shakily. "I'm leaving this building tonight. I don't think I'll survive." Alex paused the video as my breath shattered into pieces. Mom had known. Mom had fought. Mom had died trying to save us. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The hum of the servers was the only sound in the icy room. Then Lila wiped her eyes aggressively. "We take this public. All of it." Alex nodded. "Every file here will bring the entire Carter empire down. And we'll walk away from the ashes," I said. He pulled out a backup drive. "Copying everything now." But the moment he hit export, the overhead lights snapped on. Harsh, blinding. A voice echoed through the vault. "Step away from the terminal." My blood froze. My father stood in the doorway. Security guards flanked him. His expression wasn't furious. It was tired. Haunted. "Ava," he said softly. "Please. Don't do this." Lila stepped forward. "You killed Mom." He flinched as if struck. "I didn't." I swear it. I tried to stop them, but I was too late. I didn't move. Then why try to stop us now? Because if you release this, he whispered, the entire Carter name collapses. Everything I built, everything she built goes up in flames. Let me fix it quietly. No, I said. His jaw trembled. Please, Ava. I'm your father. You were her husband, I said, and you didn't protect her. Silence. Then Alex pressed the final key. Export complete. Alarms blared. Dad's face crumpled. And in that moment, I knew the truth. Saving him was never my responsibility. Saving ourselves was. We slipped past security in the chaos, racing down emergency stairwells, bursting into the freezing air as sirens wailed inside the building. In the distance, we heard shouting. But we didn't look back. We had everything we needed. And for the first time in my life, the Carter legacy wasn't my burden. It was my proof, my liberation, my power. Later, as the sun rose over the city, and our evidence hit every major news outlet, I stood beside Lila and watched the world learn the truth. Mom's truth. Our truth. My father's empire crumbled before breakfast. I didn't feel triumph. I felt release. A gentle, quiet freedom settling into my bones. The kind Mom wanted for us. The kind they tried to steal. If you followed my journey this far, thank you for witnessing the truth behind the shadows. Share your thoughts below, subscribe for the next story, and stay with me because the strongest voices are the ones rebuilt from silence.